Gadguru Name, Sadguru Name, Sri Guru Deva Name. Jivan Mukta, you're originally from Chile, and you've been living in Finland for a long time, actually, for a long time, and now you're settled in Gran Canaria. So you're really a citizen of the world. You're a teacher trainer, level 1 and level 2. And what brings us here with you and your company is the work that you have been researching on Kundalini Yoga and its origins, and also your perspective on what is this research that you brought for your thesis. Maybe you will tell us more about it in the coming time. And also to the light of what is happening today in our community.
Yes, well, thank you, Avtar, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this discussion. I think it's very inspiring to be able to formulate and articulate some of the ideas that I have been meditating on, and also being able to share what I have studied and what I have looked into in relation to Kundalini Yoga, the history, but essentially the experience though. So I don't know where you want to start with. I have written a few things, and my doctoral thesis revolved around the experience of within our teaching, within the teaching of Kundalini Yoga, and so it became a very fascinating thing for me, as I was originally motivated by my own experience to, at some point, start to realize the power and the beauty of what can happen if you practice Kundalini Yoga. So I don't know where you want to start the discussion, or what kind of question you have first for me to start unfolding the ideas.
So you were practicing Kundalini Yoga, and what was your intention in writing your thesis about the experience in Kundalini Yoga, and where did that intention bring you?
Yeah, well, I'll try to make this a short story because it's mixed with my own personal process and my own path. And so when I entered into Kundalini Yoga, it was trying to find some answers. I was trying to understand the unusual experiences I've had before. I had a strong spiritual background already before Kundalini Yoga, and so I had some elements in my life that we could phrase as perhaps mystical or religious or spiritual. I don't think it really matters how we label them, but they belong to that type of department of life, the spiritual department of life. And so then I began to practice Kundalini Yoga in order to bring more clarity and understanding to what had happened to me. And so in that moment, I fell in love with Kundalini Yoga, and I decided that the type of mechanism or technique that Kundalini Yoga provides is so effective in helping a person to find clarity and to find a deeper understanding about who we are, or who I was at the moment. And so this led me into trying to understand, even in a broader sense, in a deeper sense as well. And so I decided that everything that I was doing parallel to my spiritual process, which in that moment was academic, I was in the university studying 2 careers, and I was assisting different subjects in the university. I decided I was going to put that whole effort and energy into matching and combining with the spiritual side that was unfolding. And so I decided I was going to continue in that path of the academia as well as the spiritual, and I was going to mix this together. And so I did it by studying a PhD in comparative religions. Now, by saying PhD, I don't think it means anything in terms of status or anything like that. So to make that clear, it's just a further study. And so when I engage this, I wanted to really bind together these two aspects of myself, one researching the spirit through a spiritual mechanism, the other researching the truth through a social science protocol. And then I ended up writing this thesis about the experience in 3HO and analyzing the teachings of Yogi Bhajan and identifying the sources where this teaching comes and how the sources are rooted in the understanding that they must be taught, because they come from that Indian background that I can explain soon, where the philosophy is combined with the practice, and this is what we know as Samkhya and Yoga. These two come together. One is the philosophy, Samkhya, and the other is the practice, that's Yoga. And so these two come together, and the experience is the result of this, and then the experience itself, it's a path in a way, and so that's what I explain in that thesis.
And could you say that the experience could also lead to a form of understanding of this philosophy also, or does it require a specific motivation to go beyond the practice, let's say, or to look at what is activating the practice?
The experience is perhaps universally and interculturally one root and one base out of which wisdom can be built. From philosophers of our classical background in the West, I mean Greeks and Romans, to the Indian sadhus, going through the yogis and passing also through the Buddhist monks, all the paths that take things a little bit further, or if you wish, a little bit deeper, they have a direct relationship to the concept and the pursuit of a certain experience. Now, the experience itself is not the end, but it is a means to the end. And so when you practice anything that has a sort of physiological base like yoga, Kundalini Yoga specifically, for example, you will be activating obviously your physiology, specifically your brain, in such a way that you will increase the capacity to understand. And so that will give you further abilities to embrace life, to understand life, to see things with your intelligence, with your awareness. And so it can spark in you wisdom. It can spark in you the understanding of who you are. And so without that spark, which comes from experience, what you could have is rather knowledge and not necessarily embodied in your own being, which is what gives us wisdom.
Satnam, this is Siri-san talking to everybody. If you have questions for Jivan Mukta, please say it in the chat and I will moderate them. Thank you. You're most welcome to ask them anytime you wish. You don't have to wait until the end.
So, in writing and researching, what did you discover in the light of 3HO and how those teachings were brought to the West by Yogi Bhajan? What was the base of your work, let's say?
Well, Avtar, this is really interesting because as I was approaching this, I approached it with a very, in a way, innocent spirit, like really trying to see what was there. And then I started to find out very beautiful things, very deep things in relation to our tradition. I found also the basic streams that feed the construct of the teaching as taught by Yogi Bhajan, as we would normally understand it. And I think this is the first clear realization that came to me to be able to identify that the construct of our teaching is coming from three sources that Yogi Bhajan interpreted and put together in a very special way. And these three sources are of different types. One of them is obviously the yogic source, and that is yogi/tantric. He brings into the teaching this very clear yogic practices with philosophical grounds on the yogic tradition, then that's one source, and we cannot ignore that because it's evident that is an essential part of this teaching. Now, the other source is Sikhism, is the Sikh religion, and there's a lot of input and notions and frames to understand the reality of the spiritual journey coming from the Sikh tradition. And then there's a third source, and that's the source of spiritual astrology. And he didn't name it as such, but it's astrology finally, anyways. And this spiritual astrology gives the sense to understand the unique opportunity of the times we are living right now, and how that is related to a change that is happening in a bigger context, in the context of actually the stars and the constellations and the planets in which our solar system and planet Earth exists. And so these three streams of philosophy, we can say, feed and construct the basic teaching that we have. And so this was the first very clear thing that came to me. It's not that some people think that the teaching of Yogi Bhajan has been exactly the same for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think that understanding or interpretation is a little bit too literal. And the development of our teaching is actually a constant formulation and constant reformulation, and then in the person of Yogi Bhajan, it comes to very latest version, let's say, as we know it at least now. It might still continue developing and evolving. That is what we're gonna see in the coming years and perhaps decades. But these three sources are essential to understand the teaching. If you take one away, you don't understand it. You will miss essential elements of what is Kundalini Yoga and what is the teaching. If you would take, let's say, Sikhism out, or yoga out, or if you would take the astrological understanding out, it won't make sense. It will become something else.
So the experience then of Kundalini Yoga would be completely transformed if you would take one of those elements apart, you mean?
No, I think that the experience will probably be the same, but the way you understand it and frame it will be different. And this is what I also explain in that work, that the way we express the experience is somehow making the experience. It is in the process of description, or as I said it in the work itself, is how we deem, how we consider the experience to be, what actually makes our ability to integrate the experience possible. Someone could be sitting in an easy pose and then feel trembling in the spine, and then run away looking for a psychologist or a psychiatric doctor in order to fix something that went wrong. But the same kind of experience, interpreted in a spiritual context, could be narrated as something that was actually a wake-up call for that energy of that person to live a more meaningful life. And so the experience won't change. It's the way how we interpret it.
You talk also in one of your articles about the difference between experience and versus belief. Mm-hmm. Sorry, the sun is reflecting on the window. Could you maybe elaborate about that concept?
Well, there are different dimensions of religiosity. From the point of view of study of religions, you would say that there are about 6 dimensions of religion. For example, institutional dimension is one, practice is another, experience is another dimension, and obviously belief is another dimension. And so we are talking about different dimensions of one phenomenon. And so we look at religion and religious phenomena from different dimensions. belief is part of religion. Not all religions have the same, let's say, emphasis on belief. Some religions are very emphatically making faith and belief the essence, and other religions make and put the emphasis in experience. And so when we come down to this teaching that Yogi Bhajan shared in the West, and when it comes down to the message that he delivered, the beginning of this teaching, and then throughout the teaching itself, you can see and trace that through history of what he was teaching. It's very much linked with the idea of experience, that all what he was sharing was to be experienced by those who wanted to learn with him. And it was not that people needed to believe him. At least this is what he said most of the time, and there are many documents and many books that he wrote, or some of his students, first students wrote, that clearly show that experience is the emphasis that he gave to his particular proposal to spiritual evolution, if we can call it. And so, I don't know if I'm answering your question, if that's what you mean, but there's a difference of emphasis. Now, you can of course live in a certain religious environment or spiritual environment. You can label it in different ways, but essentially a place where you can develop your spiritual consciousness, and your personal emphasis could be, for example, the faith and the belief. And the belief in a being that is divine, whether it's outside or inside, is up to the person, the believer. Or you can be in the same environment, actually exactly the same environment, and your emphasis could be the experience of that ultimate being. Who is wrong, who is right? No one. They're just different emphases. And everyone can somehow choose the kind of path that wants to unfold. However, in the teaching of Yogi Bhajan, it was very explicit that the experience is essential, and this is also because of the yogic tradition behind him. The yogic tradition is essentially understanding that this is to be experienced in one's own mind and body. And so if that is achieved, the person will truly understand what the texts are, and therefore will move into a belief, perhaps, of the text into the experiencing of the truth of the texts. And so this is somehow another element that they connect between experience and belief.
Thank you. In relation to that perspective, could you make a bridge with the golden chain, maybe? Is this something that that we can link that to the experience or the belief in the golden chain? Because we know that so lately there has been some discussion about the golden chain, and is it a belief or is it an experience? And I think you wrote something about that as well.
Yes. I had to read everything that was written about this teaching from authors that are within the community of Kundalini Yoga, and authors that look at this teaching from outside. And by this second group, I mean academic people. And so one of these people that I read is Philippe de Sleep. I have heard that he's becoming very known in our community because he wrote a book from Maharaj to Mahantantric, in which he was very critical to the concept of the golden chain. And I think that this is at the background of these questions that you're asking. And I think his points are valid if you would consider, or if you would interpret the idea of the golden chain historically. And I think that is the essential perspective that Philippe de Sleep had, and then a lot of people that follow his interpretation, that the golden chain is a historical construct made up by Yogi Bhajan. And my investigation is actually showing something different. I have looked into sources, for example, in Vedanta, and in one of my articles I speak about that, in which actually in order to learn Vedanta, which is the last versions of the Upanishads, in order to actually learn the Shastra, Shastra means teaching, in order to learn the teaching, people and students, teachers were normally going to tune in, and they use certain Sanskrit mantras. One of them, for example, is quoted in my latest article. And then the idea is that there is a progression and also a network of human beings that have dedicated their life to access the spiritual dimension of life. And so it is possible to understand and interpret this in the light of the Indian tradition, not necessarily as a historical reality. The golden chain is not a historical reality. A lineage is historical reality. The lineage of your father, your mother, and your grandparents and back, and so your teachers and the teacher of your teachers. That's a lineage. But the golden chain, in the understanding that comes from India, from the Vedanta, is actually a spiritual network. And so it's not something to be, it's like talking about God in a way. It's like, where is God? Well, you gotta believe in God, but you can also experience God. And I think that's the kind of question you're asking, right? Can you experience God? Well, according to the yogis, yes. That's the point of yoga, to experience the spiritual reality that is inside of us, which is part of a major frame of a spiritual identity that is in all the universe. And so the yogis believed and they experienced that capacity to connect to that spiritual reality. And in order to progress in this journey, they always, and the traditional Indian sadhus always tune in, and they tune in with this network, this spiritual network. And the evidence is that in history, this has always been the case in spiritual environments. Now, what did Yogi Bhajan do was give it a name. He called it the golden chain. And this is it's an innovation, because until him, there wasn't an idea or idea was, but there wasn't a name for it. People just tap into that framework of a spiritual network, and so they would be able to learn. They will be able to open up their own energies. They will be able to open up their cognition. And Yogi Bhajan, coming from that background, he just transmit the same idea, but Yogi Bhajan was a person that liked to give names to things, and so he called it the golden chain. And so if you would, let's say, think of the golden chain as something historical, you are missing the point. You are trying to put within history, within time and space, something that is beyond history, beyond time and space. And so that has been, in a way, in my understanding, the correct way to understand or think of the golden chain. And this is separate to a historical lineage of teachers. It's not exactly the same. They connect, they have points in common, but it's not equal. Golden chain to lineage of teachers is not exactly the same. The golden chain, just to wrap up the idea, the golden chain is something that is very much linked to what in the West, in our Western culture, is called perennial philosophy. So what is that? It's the core of all real, genuine spiritual understanding and wisdom, and it is the base and core that you can see present in other traditions. And so when you would open yourself to that deep, mystical, if you wish, understanding, you will be accessing that golden chain, which is the accessing to the universal truth. That's why it's beyond time and space. And I think Yogi Bhajan, that's why he spoke about certain people, but he didn't literally explain or interpreted the golden chain as something that was based on historical people, historical masters alone, or restricted to that.
So that gives. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I have a question. This is Siri-san. So could we say that the whole legacy and history of Kundalini Yoga is about experience and physicality of the moment more than a lineage and a legitimacy?
I think that what we have to say is that in our teaching there are many dimensions. One is the, let's call it, historical dimension. Another is, let's call it, mystical dimension. Another, we can say, is the institutional dimension. Another is the experiential dimension. And all of them are really important to construct a certain spiritual proposal, as I like to call it, a proposal in which people can think, well, this is a valid path for myself, and I could engage it, and I could use it as my lifestyle to develop my spiritual awareness. But then all these elements have to be there. It's not that one is more important than the other, but they have all certain particularities, and the experience is the one that particularly affects the heart of people. If there's no experience, people don't have the intimate and deepest conviction to walk a path in which they will meet a lot of difficulties. If there's an experience of something inside, or if there's an experience of something outside that shows them and they interpret it as something that is purposeful, inside or outside, then they will walk the path. Perhaps the experience is experience of despair, turn into an experience of full surrender. Whatever that is, the experience in whichever form it comes up is an essential point of ignition of the spiritual path, and also it helps to carry people through the spiritual path. That's why we need to shake our comfort zone in order to shake our experience. Otherwise we stay in the certain plateau of understanding or awareness, and we don't keep progressing. And so we need to create experiences in our lives, not for the sake of having experiences, not just to seek experiences for the experiences themselves, but because they expand you into the reality of your body and the world. And if that experience of your body and the world is not hitting you in some point, you will just be living in the mind, and the path might become something very mental, in which you rationalize everything about it, everything about yourself, without having the true understanding of your own experience of who you are. So that's why it's very essential, but it's not the only one. It's not limited to that one. In this sense, if I can explain myself a little bit further, I follow the idea of Gabor Mate, that is a psychologist, and he said that nowadays we have something is called spiritual materialism, and that is when people start to look for experiences just for the sake of experiences. That's called, according to him, spiritual materialism. And this is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about going and doing a practice and get feeling high. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the mindfulness. Oh, that word is so manipulated. Let's say attention. The attention to go through your own life experience and understand that you are a complex being that is a crossroad between matter and spirit. And so when you open yourself to be attentively to the experience, which is happening right now, it's happening to you, to all of us, in each second, in each breath. And if we bring the attention there, we can open a window in our cognition to understand the spirit that we ultimately are.
There is something about, you're talking about the construct, mm-hmm. and how much, you're also mentioning in your articles about the teacher-centered practice or construct that is around, very much based on that teacher figure, and which is, I think, an inherited from the Indian tradition, where, or also like in our Romano-Greek culture, there will always be also like some guides on the spiritual path. What do you think is, now we're in a transition, what would be then the move from that centered figure of the teacher and all our trainings that are based on that, and the evolution into another model maybe of receiving and experiencing those teachings?
Yes, the teacher centrism. So if the question is what does it mean, and what implications I see in that philosophy, right? Well, I have come across a few types of religious phenomena, and in terms of how some beliefs and some structures of walking a particular path are built up. And well, okay, let me put it this way. The process of having a teacher is essential. We have always in our culture, and all cultures, teachers that have instructed us to learn how to live life, let's say. Now, what particularly is very strong in our own proposal of spiritual evolution, as we know it in Kundalini Yoga, is that the teacher has become somehow a very big central figure, and it does not entirely fit our actual culture. In our culture, we have had not exactly the same expression of teacher-student that they have had in India. In our culture, we have, ever since Aristotle or Socrates or any of these, we have had a perspective to respect and learn from the teacher, but at the same time to question the teacher, and to even test the teacher in a way that it would actually bring about more truth on the subject matter, whatever that is. And so we have taken this too far, perhaps, in our own culture. We have seen in history that people like Socrates or Jesus and many others have been actually killed, have been murdered, have been punished, have been put in the cross. And I think this is definitely not the model that is going to work in these times of history. But I'm not sure if the model of India will work the same, where the teacher is God. In India, what the teacher says is a representation of the person's higher self. And so if the teacher says something, you have to simply obey and you have to follow. And if you question, you put yourself in problems. In India, in the Eastern traditions, to question the teacher is seen as something really ungraceful from the behalf of the student. And therefore, it fits the Indian mentality because they were brought up and they are wired to relate to the teacher in that way. But then when you export that model to the West and you install it in the West, and then you expect that Westerners will behave the same way as an Indian, then you have a little bit of issues here, because the spirit of Westerners is more scientific. If there is a clear difference between East and West, it's actually that East has developed mysticism, religiosity, and West has developed science and knowledge that can be proved empirically. And so this is the problem, and our philosophy in our teachers' environment of Kundalini Yoga is that the teacher is the center, and people come, and then they are seen, if they are students, as potential teachers, without understanding that the Western student, even though you might be able to talk him or her into understanding the Indian philosophy and how things are done there, still remains a Westerner. It still will have a critical mind. And if you remove that element of what is naturally Westerner and you remove the critical mind, we will have problems. Because then you remove something which is actually something positive. That critical understanding of Westerners has built up a lot of good things in terms of science and technology in order to progress in our way to experience life. If you remove that critical element, then you're removing the element that has contributed greatly to the progression of our civilization, Western civilization. And so what happens with the teacher in our communities that has been too central in an Indian way. And now we need to reinterpret what we do with the teachers that we are or we want to become, and how do we progress in that journey from the stage of the student, and making this more aligned with the subconscious cultural elements or unconscious collective consciousness that we have in our Western society. If that is ignored, we're gonna just fall for a new guru coming from India, because the new guru coming from India will tell us, just do as I tell you and don't question me, because if you question me, you're out. And then if we surrender our logics, it's not necessarily the same as surrendering our ego. Sometimes this is very misunderstood. Surrendering the logics means that anyone can tell you anything and you will have to believe it. Things that make no sense. But if you surrender the ego, it's a different thing. That's necessary to put your ego under a certain, discipline. Very necessary. But surrender your logics. It's always with a person, with another human being that was born thousands of kilometers away. Why would you do that? Because the person tells you, okay, Satnam, go with that. I don't think it's the times for continuing that path. I'm not saying it's wrong. Please don't misunderstand me. I think that this is not the process for the future. I, as a teacher of Kundalini Yoga, I wouldn't tell my students, do it because I tell you. I don't think that is a good answer anymore. Because my students are Westerners. They want to test it. They want to know what I'm talking about. They want to know if I'm legitimately teaching the things that I claim to know. Because this is how Western thought is. An Indian person born in India won't think that way. You just follow, and that's how they do. Now we need to be able to finally make sense of how we do yoga and teach yoga in a global world where the philosophies and cultural backgrounds are all different. And we need to be able to transmit the good message of this teaching, the good teachings, the good methods of these teachings, in a way that modern people, 21st century people, can say like, okay, I'll give this a try. And if the experience, as we know, it works, it will teach them further. And we can collaborate with each other, sometimes in the position of the teacher, sometimes in the position of the student. I once, the first person that spoke to me in terms of yoga and Aquarian age at the same time wasn't Yogi Bhajan. It was someone from the in Spanish is called La Gran Fraternidad Universal. In English would be like the great universal fraternity or brotherhood, I think. And it was initiated by a yogi called Sergei Reynaud de la Ferrière, a French yogi. And he said that in the Aquarian age, and he spoke about this in the 60s and 50s, 50s, 60s. In the Aquarian age, everyone will be a teacher and everyone will be a student. And that to me makes a lot of sense. because we learn from each other. We don't learn only from one teacher. We have many people we learn from throughout all our life. We have many teachers that we learn from throughout all our life. And then we also teach a lot of different people throughout our life. And this is especially now, as knowledge is so important. We all are teachers, and we all are students.
Thank you. You're talking about knowledge and as we are shifting from something that we knew to something that we have been kind of advised to, that is coming, but not necessarily yet. Although we see that, as you said, the millennium, they're already more anchored in the Aquarian age. And there's this quote that from Socrates that you wrote and that you gave in your article: "Obscurity is dispelled by augmenting the light of discernment, not by attacking the darkness."
Yeah.
And I find it very relevant with what is happening in the situation in our community, and about the information and also the overload of information that we have, and the what would it require then to apply discernment?
Mm. I think that what is happening nowadays is unfolding organically in that direction. This type of environment where you and I and some people listen to this podcast or talk show, I don't know how you want to call it, it's an invitation for further discernment. Now, in order to increase the discernment on complicated matters, what is required is to investigate them. That's the bottom line. And so what is happening and unfolding naturally is that people want to know more about the history of Kundalini Yoga. People want to know more about the science and the physiological changes that science can show throughout the practice of Kundalini Yoga. People want to know more what are the effects of the mantras in the psyche as they practice them. And they want to understand, just to be on the safe side, that they're doing something that makes sense. And so in order to increase discernment, we need to increase research. And I don't speak from the point of view of a scholar. I speak from the point of view of a person that really is so, in my case, drawn to know. I just want to understand things, and I want to know. And this is taking me very far and very deep. I wasn't supposed to be doing this in my original plan. I was supposed to be in a different environment, but the need for knowing, and I think this is a universal need, it's not just mine, for knowing ourselves. It's written in the temples, in Greece. Know thyself. Requires a serious investigation and dedication. That's what discernment implies. And that is happening in our community. It's happening through this Anne Olive branch, which is researching an aspect of our teacher, of the life of his teacher, but not the whole teacher. But then I think this type of research will continue. We will have to put ourselves into the search of the sources. And I don't mean to become scholars. I mean to basically know where things come from, and who are and what are the contributions of, let's say, Baba Virsa Singh, who is known to be one of the most important teachers of Yogi Bhajan, but is being removed from the official history. I'm sorry to say this, but this is a matter of fact. And so how can we correct this lack of historical awareness? Well, by creating more discernment. How can we make this more clear for us? Well, getting to understand who was Baba Virsa Singh, for example. And so all elements that have been unclear, we need to bring clarity to them. We need to be humble to know that we don't know as much as we think. That to be humble to consider that perhaps we don't even know ourselves as much as we think. Perhaps we don't even know our teaching, or perhaps we don't even know our teacher. And so when we come to that humility to say, okay, well, we gotta be more humble. And so from that point of humility, then we have the chance to really know more, because we start from the understanding and acknowledgement that we don't know enough. And so how we do make discernment come up? Exploring more, investigating more, opening the doors and windows that are shut and letting the light come in, and then make people know and make people access these different conclusions that some of us are providing through our own individual researches, or hopefully one day we will have a institution in Kundalini Yoga that is in charge of research. We don't have such an institution. We have never had it. There's some institution that has a name, but it's not actually engaging that basic, essential task that is supposed to have an institution that is supposed to research. So until that institutionality is not built up, we're pretty much in a sort of a dark age in our community, and only will be lightened up by a few people that search and provide documents, and they provide facts, and they provide evidence, and that's the ground of the new community, based on evidence, based on facts, based on historical truth, based on a narrative that is created on solid grounds, not on histories or stories that we have been transmitting orally. There are actually many sources that are available, and if we keep ignoring them, of course it's going to be very difficult to understand deeper what is going on. The question is, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve by joining a spiritual club? If you know what I mean. Whatever group you join in order to develop some aspect of yourself, you need to know why you join it. And so if let's say we can identify what is our true motivation to be in this or another dharma, and then see how the dharma itself or that particular path itself can help you to achieve that original purpose, then it's easier. Everyone will know what they're looking for, and they will search for it. But if a dharma itself is unclear, and I think this is more or less the situation happening to the world of Kundalini Yoga, no? That it's unclear what we are looking for. I see that sometimes I ask, what's the ultimate goal of yoga? And people say several things. They say love, they say compassion, they say enlightenment. And I say, well, fair enough. I mean, all that is beautiful and valid, and why not? But if you would look at what can the yogic path provide, we will have to look into what Hatha Yoga Pradipika and what Patanjali in the sutras have commented, and everyone will agree to the same idea, and that's moksha, that's liberation. And so if we would understand exactly what a path can provide us, then we will be able to align our practice, and so we can implement, we can bring it to practice. But if the path is like you just do whatever you want, it's not so clear how we could implement a strategy to reach something that is not so solidly defined, and the yogic path is not so clearly defined in our tradition. For some people, is more than enough, but I think that it still lacks a little bit of depth, and I think it still lacks clarity. And so, as long as that lack of depth and clarity about the ultimate capacities of the development in the yogic path are, then it's going to be difficult to really walk the path in a coherent way, and we will be, I think, as we are doing, and it's fine because we are a new proposal. 3HO Kundalini Yoga Stop by Yogi Bhajan has only 50 years. And so it's still, if you look in a historical sense, if you look at it in a more macro level, it's just like a very quick expression of spirituality, and it's at the beginning. You can only see the spirituality after how it builds up after at least 2 or 3 generations. That means 60 to 90 years. If we would have this talk in 10 more years, after 2 generations, full generations is 30 years, or even more, 90 years, 3 generations, then we will see what ultimately was the legacy left to us, what stood up and what became strong foundation for eventually a civilization, because we're in a global civilization, and who knows, maybe in a few more decades, millions of people will be practicing some form of Kundalini Yoga. It's possible, why not?
You're talking about the 50 years, and that's something that you wrote about this 50 years and the Aquarian age and the astrological part, which is one of the 3 pillars that you were talking at the beginning about, yeah, the yoga, Sikhism, and the astrological situation also. Like the 2020 is definitely, if you replace it in the context of what our global society is experiencing. And you're talking about Chiron coming back and returning, and it reminded me a little bit like in the life cycles where you come back at the same moment where you were in the past, but with the consciousness and the capacity to heal through that consciousness. And I find it's also a moment of crisis that can be lived as a crisis, and yet also as an opportunity. And the 2020 is also like that outburst of a lot of emotional charge that is creating a push through the subconscious patterns that may have been covered for a long time, and 50 years later we have a chance to uncover that, to move on.
Well, that's it. When I speak about astrology, I speak understanding astrology a little bit in the Jungian way. Jung was speaking about astrology as something that provides symbols, and then if you're able to read the symbols, they're not giving you actually the key to understand the causes of why you're going through a certain matter. It's not that the causes are up there in the symbols. It's rather, as Jung said, they provide meaningful coincidences. And so if you understand the symbol, you will see that in a certain configuration in the sky, those symbols have a meaning in themselves. And there's a coincidence. If you will look that in relation to your particular life, and in relation to that, you will see that your life is having a similar meaning at that moment. Or the meanings that you are giving to your personal experience are similar, and they are somehow reflected in the sky. And that's coming from very early times of Hermes Trismegisto that spoke about as above, so below. It's just like a mirror. And so you gotta learn to read the symbols of the sky in order to be able to sometimes shed light on the issues of our planet or our life individually or collectively. Now, one of these symbols is the one you spoke, I wrote in that article, is Chiron. Chiron is a very, very symbolic planet that represents the wounded healer in the Greek mythology. And so it's the sort of symbol or archetype of that part of us which is wounded, but at the same time is capable of regenerating itself. And so when we have Chiron in our map, meaning the natal chart, and it falls in a particular place, it means that area of our lives requires our attention, because there we have a wound, and there we have the chance to heal that wound. Now, the interesting thing about the orbit of Chiron is that from that point when we are born, it takes about 49 to 50 years to come right to the same spot. And guess what? We are exactly that 49, 50 years from the time of Yogi Bhajan's first lectures in the West, when he founded 3HO. Is practically exactly now 51 years, but it's astrologically 1-2 years back and forth is not big difference. So these are the times where the initial wound that is particular to this particular dharma is now coming back to the same spot, and this is not caused by Chiron. Chiron is just saying this is the meaningful coincidence with what is happening in our community. It's like, learn to understand the symbology of what Chiron means, and you will understand what is happening here with 3HO, with Kundalini Yoga, with Sikh Dharma, with all the institutions and all the teachings and all the things that were built around Yogi Bhajan. And definitely, as you're saying, Avtar, I think is a very good point. It's an invitation for healing something that was left behind and that was seeded 50 years ago. And now it's boom, it comes to the surface. And now we need to know and have the compassion. I think that is the right word and the right approach to what is going on. Without that ability to have compassionate and forgive, and I'm not thinking of anyone specifically, I'm thinking in very abstract terms, and also perhaps even personal. If we don't allow ourselves to forgive, we can not really move forward. We cannot really grow. And there's things that were traumatic. There were things that were painful. And so these kind of things need to be healed. And this is the time that Chiron is back to show us that this is what is happening. It's necessary. And the problem I see is that when the trauma is so big, when the trauma of a person, individual, or a collective, and what it has happened is so difficult, what most of the time happens to the psyche, or at least very often, is that the psyche, the mind, cannot even think of it, cannot even think of that pain, and it therefore rejects further elaboration of the issue at hand. And then it does not give the possibility for a new model or a new explanation or paradigm to raise, and it stays in the past, wounded, but denying the wound because it's difficult to handle. And so there's an important number of people in our community that are in that process in which, and probably some of them will stay there, it's just too big to think of it entirely. So it's just that door is closed, and we just keep living life the way it was given, and that is not dealt with. And so this is one of the potential problems that we will have to face in the coming months, or perhaps years.
Then if we project ourselves in the future, let's say from now on, move on, because it's also in humans' nature, to move on with the wound, whether it's healed or not. We are moving on. You're also proposing an alternative to the future is to, maybe you can elaborate with that, discover a solid intersubjective core. And I found this idea, in order to move on, quite appropriate to what the process we're in.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to understand is that we belong to a new generation, and we need to allow ourselves to think differently. If we don't allow ourselves to think differently, we don't allow ourselves to think of the wounds and then to produce new solutions or new strategies to heal, and think differently in an innovative way, there won't be future. We cannot solve the same issues or the old issues with the old mechanisms. They haven't actually healed anything. That's what we are experiencing now. And so the solution comes from many angles, from many levels, not just philosophically or in terms of healing or in terms of how to arrange our institutions. But I think that there are some basic ways that we got to agree. And that's when I share this idea of intersubjectivity, which means essentially that we can all have our own subjective experience. Some people will have it very differently. But amongst this intersubjective experience, if we all pay attention to one thing, and we do it rigorously and we do it systematically, let's say the history of Kundalini Yoga, and we will find out that there are some things that we can all see. There are some elements that we can all identify, and that becomes an intersubjective reality. And that we can all say, well, okay, this is somewhere from where we can build up a future for us. But if we try to be objective, that's impossible. There's always different angles to everything. But even different angles are the case, we can have an intersubjective understanding of the same issue at hand. And that allows us to create community, to orbitate towards a same, let's say, idea of history, that we can read it. It's just there. It's intersubjective. Any subject that comes in contact with that will be able to see it, because it's based on evidence. It's based on historical facts. And if you want to deny it, well, that's actually beyond the possibility. If you deny reality, that's a different issue. But the majority of people don't want to deny reality, especially if it's evident, especially if it's self-evident. And that's the core of intersubjectivity. There are things that are evident. There are things that are self-evident. And we need to be able to look at those things and say, okay, fair enough. This is true. Okay, that's a pillar. That's a foundation. And then you add another pillar to that. And then another. And then you have the fundamental foundation that makes a collective group of people with all of them subjective interpretations of everything. But you make them look into a similar core that they all can relate to. Even though they have subjective ideas, they all can all see the same thing. It's not objective, but it's in the mind of everyone, it makes sense as it is presented. Whether that is the example of history or whether that is the example of given by the researches on how yoga affects the body. Whatever the thing that we put at the center as intersubjective, I think that is the only way. Otherwise, we will be just fighting with our own interpretations. Don't listen, like you think this way, you think that way, but hold on. We can all think differently, fair enough. But there's some intersubjective elements, and we need to look at them.
Then that would apply also with what we are seeing at the moment with the first generation and the second generation of Kundalini yogis?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And the second generation is a little bit more complex than the first generation. The first generation is pretty much built up and taught and trained to follow basically the same patterns. And that first generation has a certain experience which is common to all of them to a good degree, but not the second generation. Because in the second generation, you have the people that were the sons and daughters of the first generation, but you also have in the second generation those who have no contact with Yogi Bhajan, but they embrace the teaching through the first generation of teachers. And so the second generation is more complex. It has more elements to it. It has a global membership. The second generation is built up by people from Singapore, from Argentina, from Ireland, from France, from US, and from New Zealand. And the second generation requires a very, very well meditated answer to many questions that are raising now. And if we are not able to provide those answers, then basically the size of the second generation will start shrinking. And then we will just have to pray for a third generation that well makes more sense of all what is happening.
Which you call also a deeper foundation. Is also, does they go this way?
I think the deeper when I spoke about that, I think that the foundation of our teaching and the foundation of our path has very much been the interpretation of Yogi Bhajan of these three traditions: the Sikhi, the yogic / tantric, and the astrological. And that has been the foundation, his interpretation. And it's very special and it's very innovative. Yogi Bhajan was himself a paradoxical being. He was very Saturnian, but he was also very Aquarian. I mean, all of Kundalini Yoga, as taught by Yogi Bhajan, is an Aquarian innovative expression. And so, what now I'm saying about in the article about the deeper foundation, I am thinking of these things and these particular three traditions that we have to dig in deeper. And we have to dig in deeper to understand, for example, the tremendous influence of Baba Siri Chand in our tradition. Baba Siri Chand was in the life of the first 6 or 7 gurus, and it was so relevant. He was a constant in the life of 6 or 7 gurus, a constant, and it wasn't just someone at the background. No, at all. No, not at all. He was supporting the mission of his father and the successors of his father till he comes out of the picture when he was very old, as we know. And therefore, we need to know this deeper. These are the foundations. These are the deeper levels of the foundations. And it doesn't require that everyone has to become a scholar. No. It basically requires that some people that have the makings or motivation to do these kind of things start doing it. And obviously, it would be very good if we would have an institution that would serve that purpose, an institution that would do a research. But so far, we haven't had it. So, in that sense, is at this stage left to those individual spirits that are searching for deeper levels of this teaching.
Satnam, I have a question from Nidan Hari. Where can we read more about your thesis?
It's online. There's a link. This is the last thesis I have. I was just looking before this. This thesis I don't think is so honestly. So well, it's actually a contribution. Okay, I'm not trying to be falsely modest, but it's a contribution. Okay, fair enough. You can have a link. You can go to my webpage, yogalafontaine.com, and you can go to blog, and then you enter blog, and then there's several publications, articles, numerological reviews, videos, and so on and so forth. One of them is the link to the doctoral thesis, and also you can find some articles there.
Okay, I have another question. What will be, it's from Zvetana, what would be the future of Kundalini Yoga Sangat according to your opinion?
I don't think that the Kundalini Yoga method can be understood without the Sangat. One of the fundamental foundations is being placed by Guru Ramdas, who created this Shabad Kundalini surjit sadasangat, that the Kundalini raises, the energy of consciousness raises in the true congregation. And so Kundalini Yoga, as we know it, compared to the traditional forms of Kundalini Yoga, there are many different types anyways, but this particular form has the call, or we can call it call, that is very much about creating group consciousness. And through the group experience, the individual consciousness can be stimulated by the raising of the Kundalini. So the future of the Kundalini is not individual. The Kundalini community is actually the engine for supporting individuals. And I think that the understanding of the future of Kundalini Yoga is going to somehow be a consequence of the understanding of how we organize ourselves from now on. And that way of organizing ourselves from now on, in my opinion, cannot be centralized in one country anymore. It has to be global. And it cannot be based on one single language, which is English. It has to be multilingual. And it has to be based on the experience that people have and not the dogma that we would like some people to follow, which is not my case though, but some people would like to maintain a certain dogmatic perspective to things. But I think it's not possible. I think the community is essential, and the practice that community evolves, applies together, and the way to organize community is going to determine the future of Kundalini Yoga.
Let's pray for it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea, that we pray, and we pray in a way that is also it's a broader thing. These things that are happening to us are happening to everyone, really. We're having like a planetary. These are times of conclusion. We are coming into a time of conclusion. We have to conclude a certain paradigm, and we have to do it attentively, and we have to do it seriously. And this time of conclusion is happening at many levels, like planetary, humanitary, like our world is concluding the ways to actually make possible life. And this COVID-19 is just a triggering for that. There's also cultural shifts, there are national shifts, the sense of who we are and how well or how close we are with our neighbors, the borders, one country here, the other there, everything at many levels, from planetary, perhaps even a higher, cosmic even, but at least the planetary down, cultural, national, local, family, and then individual. Individually, we are having a crisis of identity. The question of who am I is now being replaced as who are we actually? Who are we as human beings? Are they ones to destroy the planet, destroy humanity, destroy life? Or are we actually made or created in the image and resemblance of the divine? And this is time for conclusion. It's like, where are you gonna stand from now on as a human being? What's the conclusion you have about this planet Earth and how we live and how we share the resources of this planet Earth? These are times of conclusion, absolutely. And we have to pray, because there's a lot of people that don't see this. There are a lot of people that are not understanding that we have come to a point that the planet Earth is for the first time a limited space. For the first time. Before there was land for everyone sort of thing, but now planet Earth is being explored, and so much that every year we are cutting down the energy resources of the planet Earth. And if this is done systematically and it keeps being that way, and we don't know who we are, what is our identity? Is at the individual level, all these different levels coming down to individual is basically what's our identity? What are we? Who are we? And I don't think that you can arrive to that understanding through reading books. I think you are right to understanding through experience, and the experience of precisely praying, meditating, doing yoga, doing things that will activate your cognitive capacities and will spark the light of your consciousness.
Avtar, are you in heaven?
Yeah, I'm sparking my light of consciousness. That's one thing that you wrote as well, is be ready to change, and I think that's that contribution to the universe, or to the collective and universal, is that capacity in ourselves that we work on as Kundalini yogis, but not only, not just, the capacity to change and to be ready to change.
Yes, it's a precondition. But anyways, if you don't want to change, life will take care of it, because these times are times of conclusion. The paradigm that has been running at many levels, it's obsolete. It's too old. It doesn't serve the future. It doesn't even serve the present. And so we will necessarily have to. It's more than change. It's also a quest for adaptation in the Darwinian way. Like, those who adapt will survive. Those who have the resilience and the ability to adjust, then they will survive. It's those who hold on to old paradigms, those who do not adapt will just be part of history. And now we have an opportunity, especially the new generations of this planet. I'm not just thinking about our community of Kundalini yogis, but I'm thinking about our planet. The new generations have the opportunity to give the example, to show that this world can provide shelter for everyone, and that the resources of this world are all possible to share with each other, and that the key here is the individual also, how we individually embrace the task of this collective challenge. Because if the individual will say, okay, these guys are doing, the politicians, and no, we gotta be involved. We gotta be fully part of the process and engage, because that's what at the end makes the difference, that we all engage.
Thank you. I think we have been rounding up. If there's no other question.
No.
Serious
It was so clear that we just need to reflect on it and act upon it.
It was a great opportunity to exchange on that particular subject, and also on a wider awareness of what the world we're living in, up to the planetary Charon and this. Thank you very much, Jivan Mukta and Switcher Europe, and all the other participants.
Thank you all, also WHO Europe and Avtar, for this opportunity.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much, and we look forward to reading more from your research and and your engagement in this in that field, which is definitely needed.